Well, good morning, folks. Thanks for watching. I started this spring. I made the case that where the severe thunderstorm events were unfolding this year, kind of that focus, the geography there would give us some understanding of which areas were receiving enough moisture or enough precipitation, but also kind of where the areas that the Weather Channel or the Storm Chaser correspondents weren't going would also be an indication of potentially drought, which we started the year with that threat and some of that concern in the forecast. I want to update us on that conversation, where we stand here in late May, kind of at the peak of the severe weather season. After that, I want to go into the forecast a bit. We're seeing kind of an extended cool stretch for portions of the central and the eastern U.S., talk about what that might mean in terms of precipitation and also that severe thunderstorm conversation. And then near the end of the video, I want to talk about the latest IRI forecast, a seasonal forecast for June, July, August, from a model that in years prior to this one has been performing, I would say, decently, and it's at least worth taking a look at that. And that's near the end of this video as well. But like I said, I do want to start with the severe thunderstorm conversation because I made the case, if we just look across all the reports of 2025, that this would kind of help us identify areas of growing high pressure, right? Areas that haven't seen a lot of clouds, precipitation, and severe weather. We never, root for wind, hail, or tornado reports, but they are kind of a good proxy for which areas are getting more moisture than not. Now, if we look at the whole map, it's hard to almost make any case because it's so busy. We've seen such an active start to the severe weather season. In fact, if I just show you the annual charts, this is just tornado reports, picking on them to start. In a given year, we're on accumulating those reports on the black line, but this year in 2025 in red, you can see we're actually, over the last 15 years or so, second to 2011, which is our high water benchmark for severe thunderstorm reports, including tornadoes. It just shows you how fast of a start we've had that really picked up in March when we started having that conversation. Now, if I jump back over and show you the map, and in fact, I'll take it back to March, we started the year with a lot of the activity east. And that kind of prompted this conversation of we're building up drought and dry concerns in the southern plains, even the southern high plains. In fact, earlier this year, we were, if you remember from the satellite imagery, sourcing dust storms, whether it was from southeast New Mexico or west Texas, pushing those all the way up into portions of the Midwest or even Canada at times. And so we were, again, not rooting for tornadoes or hail to return to Lubbock or over toward Amarillo, but hoping some moisture, right, and precipitation would get back there. And we know that often comes with the risk of storms. In April, kind of got that wish. We saw those severe thunderstorm reports push further back west, in fact, into the Texas Panhandle, at times all the way over into eastern New Mexico, portions of central Texas, and the rains returned in a big way in April to portions of the southern plains. In fact, maybe too much rain in just a short period of time for a number of folks there. That didn't stop the activity elsewhere. The Mid-South continued to see prolific severe thunderstorm and flooding concerns as well in April, and even some at times here in May as well, and then across portions of the Central Plains, Illinois, over toward the Appalachians, these events continued. And then just here in May, we've seen that coverage broaden a bit. We've seen continued, but more spotty precipitation and severe thunderstorm chances across the Southern Plains. We've seen some, thankfully, precipitation returning to the Central Plains. We just had that tornado outbreak on Friday across portions of the Mid-South and the Midwest. And I've seen this coverage grow more broadly. Eric made the good case yesterday that we've kind of increased that savings account, if you will, of moisture across some of these southern geographies. What I mean by that is we now have quite a bit of water in portions of the central and southern plains, particularly Oklahoma, and then on a stretch of that east across Arkansas, continuing to get rain here this morning, and then across portions of the Mid-South. And so while we do have dry areas lingering to the north, right, it's getting harder to make the case for any kind of widespread, mega drought, what have you, given that we have so many different ways to now get moisture into the Midwest or the upper Midwest as we go through the year into June and into July. Now, I'm going to flip back, regarding that same conversation, April to May. In fact, let's go back to March. I want you to keep your eye on the upper Midwest, the northern plains here. In fact, I might as well draw the area that I'm looking at kind of right in through here. If you look at April, we saw some events in April. They were sporadic. We had some tornadoes that we had to talk about in April in western Iowa, if you remember those. And then in May, again, a few sporadic reports, but this area, definitely a hole showing up here and the severe thunderstorm data, and we see that reflected in just the last 30 days of precipitation departures. We've seen plenty of showers, at times thunderstorms across the Dakotas. We just talked about all the activity here across portions of the South, the southern plains, but boy, the upper Midwest, continuing to see those rainfall deficits. Now, the good news is this morning, some of those same counties getting that precipitation here this morning. You can see thunderstorms and showers pushing across Illinois. Northern Illinois critically getting some good rainfalls here just in the early morning hours with quite a bit of thunder as well. Portions of central and eastern Iowa included in that, all the way up into Minnesota. We might have to talk about some snow today in the Dakotas. We'll take a look at that. And unfortunately for the Mid-South, more thunderstorms moving through. In fact, a severe thunderstorm watch active as of this morning. You can see some of these looking a little bit stronger, even getting into Tennessee. If we look over the last 24 hours of observed precipitation, again, just talked about those areas, the overlap of where we've seen a lack of precipitation, portions of central and northern Illinois. This updates, every hour, so it's about an hour behind at this point. There we go, latest update. See that precipitation moving further north across Illinois, getting up close to an inch now across portions along the I-55 corridor and then over along I-80 into Iowa, into portions of central Minnesota. I mean, this is a good dose of rainfall, but just take you back. We're running anywhere from a 2 to 3 inch precipitation deficit in this area. And in just the last few hours, we've picked up a good chunk of that in some of these geographies here. So improving the drought situation or concern in portions of the upper Midwest continuously here. Just yesterday, a quick update on the severe reports that we saw. We were expecting, perhaps more significant tornado reports to develop, on this map. We didn't quite see that. I think that's good news. Despite that, still a number of reports. Almost up to 500 unfiltered severe reports as of right now. But a lot of wind, hail, some larger hail events as well. Again, unfortunately, more storms near St. Louis. Again, this area just doesn't need any more activity, I would argue, at this point. But seeing some of that coverage across portions of the Central Plains. The reason for that, we have this large, almost bowling ball-like upper-level trough. In fact, you can kind of see the middle of it spinning here near Kansas City. Kind of neat to see the water vapor kind of spiraling around there right near Missouri and Kansas. But the product of this has been widespread precipitation across the central and now getting into the eastern part of the country. A lot of this activity was shifted further west yesterday, and we'll see more of this expand here today. We'll have to talk about some severe weather in just a moment. If we look at the current NOAA advisories, the all hazards, I mentioned that severe thunderstorm watch, portions of Arkansas, that may have expired. Let's update that. Yeah, they're starting to truncate that down across portions of Arkansas, but we do see a flood watch here across eastern Kentucky, western Virginia. Unfortunately, the same area still cleaning up after the London, Kentucky, what's likely to be an EF4 tornado. If it's not, hasn't been rated already. And then seeing some latent flood advisories, flood warnings across portions of western Missouri, eastern Oklahoma. Again, this area has seen quite a bit of precipitation out of this event. Frost advisory across portions of upstate New York, northern PA, and some freeze warnings over here across portions of the interior west and the southwest. We jump over and look at the current temperatures here this morning. Let me update this at 6 a.m. Temperatures getting down into the upper 30s here, northern PA, over in western New York, prompting that frost advisories and some of those freezing temperatures getting into portions of the interior west as well. If we look at the Storm Prediction Center, their forecast as of today, this is their day one outlook. See all the way up to enhanced risk now across portions of the Mid-South. And again, I'll easily make the case that this is not needed nor wanted in this area in terms of both severe weather and then precipitation as well. Now the threat today, more of a wind threat. You can see their highest category here. You can always jump over and look and see what they're most concerned about. Wind being the greatest threat today across portions of central Tennessee, Kentucky, and northern Alabama. We do have a tornado threat as well. Don't want to discount that across portions of a similar geography here, including portions of northern Mississippi. We'll have to keep an eye on. They don't rule out some stronger tornadoes as a possibility today, and hail really more so just a concern right along the delta here, right along the river, and central Mississippi River Valley. Prompting that severe weather concern, well, we'll just look at the simulated forecast from the 3-kilometer NAM here. I'll make this valid. Let's do 7 a.m. Make sure I have the latest model here. Give that a chance to load. Just a second here. Let's see if I can get that. There we go. Make that valid here. Let's do 6 a.m. See some of those thunderstorms and the showers that we saw moving across portions of Minnesota, Iowa. I'm going to take this forecast into 9 a.m. See some of those storms weakening now across portions of eastern Arkansas, getting into Tennessee that we just looked at. We saw them expiring those severe thunderstorm watches. I've been kind of watching and waiting this afternoon, now to 3 p.m. Central, for storms to refire along the front here in portions of eastern Arkansas and eastern Missouri before pushing quickly into portions of central Tennessee, central Kentucky. See more isolated storms down here in northern Mississippi. Maybe just kind of looking at that quickly would be an increased tornado threat and some of these isolated potential supercells here. Otherwise, quickly evolving into a severe line of storms, again, moving through the Tennessee Valley corridor. So potentially looking at that wind threat evolving by 6 to 8 p.m., right around dinner time tonight, across the line here before quickly moving east overnight and then weakening across the Appalachians. Tomorrow morning, that activity shifts east. This is getting in toward lunchtime now across portions of the Mid-Atlantic, D.C. area, DMV over into New Jersey and eastern Pennsylvania. Again, some lingering showers on the backside of that overnight into Wednesday night. We are seeing a signal for perhaps some brief sub-severe thunderstorms moving through along kind of the northwest flow here. We'll take a look at that in a minute as well, that sneak through here in on Wednesday evening across portions of southeastern Missouri, northern Arkansas, and then western Tennessee in the overnight hours as well, but just kind of a brief chance for thunderstorms tomorrow. If we just look at the cumulative precipitation from the NAM over that same forecast that we just walked through, again, unfortunately, more rain coming for portions of the Mid-South, widespread precipitation then moving into portions of Pennsylvania, Mid-Atlantic, even up into New England, and then just falling here this morning and then in through today, some of these showers pushing through portions of the upper Midwest and the Dakotas. I want to jump over and show the ECMWF forecast over that same time period, because that'll take us kind of further out into the forecast, get an idea of where we're going. I'm going to start this here. This is valid as of, let's make it valid as of 6 a.m., so kind of right when we started that NAM forecast. So it is the global model, which means it has poorer resolution than the NAM. So we're not going to make out those individual thunderstorms, but its signal has been pretty good this year in terms of precipitation. I'm going to take this forecast through this afternoon. We can kind of, again, we can't see those individual thunderstorms, but we can see that risk for those severe thunderstorms. But the reason I'm showing the ECMWF, because it does model precipitation type. And by this evening, it does actually have some snowflakes getting to the ground here across portions of central North Dakota. Now, not expecting these to, stick and be widespread, but just flakes falling. I think today, this afternoon, or this evening after sundown would be noteworthy, certainly. Right, we're talking May 20th on the forecast here at this point. So we'll have to keep an eye on the observations up there. But again, kind of speaks to the strength of this trough, and then that we're getting precipitation up into the upper Midwest and the northern plains as well. Take this forecast into tomorrow. Again, lunchtime, we see that activity shifting east across, portions of Pennsylvania. Again, the mid-Atlantic that we just talked about. If we take the forecast in through the overnight, again, we can see those thunderstorms shooting off kind of near Kansas. These take it a little bit further south across portions of Tennessee, but weakening. Storm Prediction Center hasn't highlighted, a significant risk here for severe thunderstorms, but it is potential precipitation and some rumblings of thunder. We do see this kind of trough and this low pressure system lingering here across the east. We'll take a look at that in a minute. And potentially Friday, another one of these kind of northwest flow events, right? We just saw another one of those. This one sneaks through on Friday through geography that probably would take some more rainfall here, especially if these are sub-severe, moving quickly into portions of the Central Plains. We see those redeveloping on Saturday morning, and a potential additional low pressure system now kicking off here over parts of Oklahoma, bringing another precipitation chance here to central Nebraska areas that, despite some recent rain, I think we'd take some more of it here. Areas in eastern Wyoming, maybe even northeastern Colorado this weekend on Saturday. That activity, unfortunately, pushing through the Mid-South this weekend, and then more coverage across the Mid-South and the Southern Plains, and eventually the Gulf states as we get into early next week as well. I'm taking this forecast all the way into Wednesday next week and now Thursday, and you've probably been looking at the same area that I have here over the Midwest and the upper Midwest going dry in the forecast. So I'm going to take this forecast quickly back to the beginning, take it through. We see that activity shift to the east, that trough lingering there. We see these northwest flow events here near the weekend, eventually forming this weak low pressure system here over the southern plains, returning some precipitation chances back on Saturday and Sunday to Nebraska, the central plains, then the Mid-South early next week. But the focus mostly right south of a line here in this corridor here for precipitation, leaving the Midwest a bit dry and then colder as well. We'll take a look at that in a moment. The reason we're seeing this, if we look at the upper level height pattern, here I'll make this forecast at 7 a.m. There's that trough we're watching here. If I take this quickly into Thursday, we're seeing that pushing here across the eastern U.S., maybe centered over the Great Lakes, and it's lingering, right? Lingering across the eastern U.S. We have the northwest flow over portions of the central plains, right? We talked about the thunderstorms there. But look to the north, this dominant upper level ridge over the Hudson Bay in northern Canada. This is a feature I'm watching closely, and the reason for that is if I take this forecast out into the future, Friday, now Saturday, Sunday, it's kind of merged a little bit with this ridge trying to form over portions of Saskatchewan and Alberta. And it hasn't moved much, right? We've seen it kind of shift off toward the east a bit. It's kind of merged with this one, but we still see kind of a dominant ridge across Canada. We see lower heights as a result across portions of the central and the eastern U.S. When you have a ridge up here, it's very easy to kind of, whether by omega block or just up and down nature of the atmosphere, to get a trough into portions of the central and eastern U.S. in some cooler weather. So even out to Monday, May 26th, we still see some version of a trough lingering here across Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, the Mid-South. And we see this ridge almost kind of flattening out into a more dominant, almost continental U.S. ridge, getting out into Wednesday and then late next week where we could see the redevelopment of a western U.S. ridge in the models. We'll take a look at that in a second. Kind of what's happening, what's the result of this ridge kind of being dominant over Canada is we've gone cooler here over the eastern U.S. With this flow coming more out of Canada, we've also likely seeing a drier trend in the forecast as well. So we'll take a look at that in just a second here. If we jump over and look at the ECMWF ensemble, just kind of a difference of opinion. Again, watching this trough here, or this trough I should say, over the eastern U.S., the ridge north over the Hudson Bay. Again, taking the forecast into next week, Tuesday, Wednesday. See that lingering all the way to Thursday of next week, those lower heights over the eastern U.S., and then finally at the end of next week, potentially a more dominant ridge forming across the western U.S., allowing that ridge to break down over northern Canada all the way out to June 1st, until seeing something of a more prominent pattern change. What this means in terms of precipitation, well, at least over the next 7 days, we see a lot of activity here across portions of the Mid-South and then the southern U.S. The precipitation that you're seeing here across the upper Midwest, Illinois, portions of the eastern Corn Belt, up in the Dakotas as well, this is falling today. But beyond that, this area is actually going drier in the forecast. We'll look at that specifically in a second. But again, some of the areas here in the forecast receiving a lot of rain don't necessarily need more of it, and they certainly don't need more severe thunderstorm chances as well. If we look at the WPC, their 7-day forecast here, again, this is the rain falling here just as of today. But some of this activity here is more to come over the next 7 days and then over the next 48 hours for portions of the Mid-Atlantic. If we jump over and look at the ECMWF AIFS, again, that kind of same similar pattern. The AIFS has been a little bit lighter on some of the precipitation amounts here. But we do see, because of that northwest flow, it's kind of hard to see, make out this pattern with all the rest of the precipitation on this map. Additional decent rain chances here across portions of central Nebraska, portions of South Dakota, eastern Wyoming. We'll take a look at northeastern Colorado with some of these events to see if we can luck out on some backside precipitation there. Now, with that trough moving in and situating across the central and eastern part of the country, expecting cooler temperatures to prevail over the next 7 days, we just start out looking at minimum temperature, the forecast here. If we take this into Wednesday morning, really cold temperatures moving into portions of the Dakotas, again, dropping down into the low 30s, prompting some frost and freeze concerns here as we get into tomorrow morning. That forecast continues on Thursday, cool across portions of the central and northern plains. Now the Midwest going over cooler as well. Temperatures Thursday morning struggling to get toward 50 degrees Fahrenheit across some of the ice states. Continuing more in earnest here on Friday morning, temperatures dropping all the way into the low 40s across some wide swath of the Midwest here, upper 30s even across portions of northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan as well. We even see that freezing line here in northern Minnesota. Temperatures shifting, cool temperatures, I should say, shifting east in the forecast over portions of the Appalachians, even getting into the southeast now, temperatures falling into the 50s here Saturday morning, and then across portions of New England as well, getting down into the 40s. And that just kind of persisting here across this northern tier of the country here, even early next week on Monday. We see the same forecast from the temperature max rather than the minimum. High temperatures struggling on Thursday to get into the 60s. Just impressive cold and cool temperatures for late May here across a wide area of the country. Warmer to the south over the southwest in the southern U.S., again, further away from that upper level trough influence. So going to Friday, Saturday, Sunday, warming up a little bit on Sunday, but still for late May, typically expecting more chamber of commerce, 80-degree temperatures, not seeing that. And then finally Memorial Day. Could see some drier weather here, depending on the exact forecast. We'll take a look at that in a moment. But regardless, definitely on the cold side for a wide area of the country here on Memorial Day. It's not going to be, I would say uncomfortable, but not typically what you're thinking of for a typical Memorial Day celebration outside. We can see that same kind of pattern continuing even next week. I think this is a great showcase of that ridge over Canada, helping to influence that troughing of the central and eastern U.S. just May 25th out through May 30th, the cooler temperature pattern that we can see there. I mentioned that you kind of have to delete some of this precipitation from your mind when looking at the forecast. Well, this 4 to 10 day precipitation departure from average forecast from the ECMWF does that nicely, and it showcases that kind of dividing line with the southern U.S. rains and then the drier conditions building in to the north as we go through the end of this week and then out into next week as well. It does showcase some of that precipitation potentially moving through portions of the Continental Divide and the High Plains here. We'll take a look at that. Again, kind of rooting for some of this to get into portions of Colorado, but really the focus mostly on the southern U.S. And then extending this into an 8 to 14 day forecast from the ECMWF ensemble. Again, with that dominant ridge over Canada, just seeing a lot of dry signal here across portions of the central U.S., especially the upper Midwest, kind of an area that we're focusing on here, which is getting rain here today, right? But still in the longer term forecast has a dry signal there to keep an eye on. I do want to take a look at the ECMWF AFS really quickly. I'm going to take this out into early next week because it does have that ridge over Canada. It has that lingering trough across portions of the eastern U.S. So take this forecast forward until late Friday, now late into next week. We do see the forecast shifting now into troughing over Canada rather than the ridge. We break that down and we move a more dominant ridge into the western U.S. And this is kind of a pattern that we're seeing from the ensembles as well. The AFS is just quite a bit more aggressive with it. And if we see this develop, right, this would be an interesting pattern to start June with, where we're staying cold in the eastern U.S., we're perhaps seeing some northwest flow, getting to the central plains or the high plains, potentially some thunderstorms as well, and then heat building in to the west. Now, if this pattern holds for much of June and then into July, right, we see cooler temperatures here. We see thunderstorms coming out of Canada and the northwest flow events, some of these clippers. And this wouldn't be bad news in terms of the forecast, but early in June, kind of lingering this cold that we're already seeing build in over the next 14 days. If we were to return to that kind of in early June with this heat out west, we might be getting a little bit starved in some of the areas for GDDs here. So kind of an interesting caveat in the forecast to look at. We are well out into the forecast here. Can't put too much weight on just the AFS model, but we have seen this western U.S. ridging developing in early June in some of the models here. If we look at the Climate Prediction Center, their 8 to 14 day outlook, and see some of that heat across the west, but mainly kind of, again, focused on the cool weather to end the month of May and then into early June. If we jump over and look at the precipitation conversation, right, that dividing line shows up again. The southern U.S. stays wet, eastern U.S. over to the mid-Atlantic and New England, including parts of Florida, portions of the Pacific Northwest, but drier, less frequent precipitation over the upper Midwest and portions of the central part of the country. Finally, want to look at that latest IRI forecast for the summer. That is June, July, August. This just came out here in mid-May. And this one's curious. It pushes more of those drier contours that we've been following so closely on these different seasonal models toward the west, right? Over portions of Idaho, the Snake River Valley, portions of Montana, some of these areas dry currently, into eastern Wyoming as well, portions of the Dakotas, down through the southern plains, but the contours here are not very aggressive in that yellow color. That's 40% chance of below normal precipitation. And kind of curiously, the areas along the Mississippi River and even to the east of that, staying closer to average and then wetter here across portions of the Mid-South. No surprise there, or the Mid-Atlantic. Do have to keep an eye on, right? We've seen at times in 2025 some lingering drought return here in portions of the Carolinas and Florida. So also eyeing that as well from this model. But this one not as aggressive as some of the NMME updates that we've seen this year, or even the ECMWF. And I mention that because the IRI has performed fairly well over the last few years. So I'm liable to kind of include it in some of the ensemble basket here as a reliable signal. So I think, some of the areas that we talked about here in northern Illinois, Iowa, at least this model specifically as one run would be good news there, especially with some of that precipitation that we saw here just today. Temperature-wise, I would consider this, again, for that same area, right? Some of the high production states here, whether it's Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, definitely a little bit more mild in terms of the temperature signal here from that same June, July, August forecast. More of the heat out west and the dryness, and that ridging maybe centered on Salt Lake City or Boise, not on, Omaha or not over Des Moines, which would be good news here, at least for this one forecast from the IRI. You want to expand this out globally, again, that June, July, August forecast, because we see that concern here over portions of the Western Plains and the Northwest. We also look at Europe. Some of these areas getting precipitation here recently, some in the forecast, but Ukraine, Western Russia, the grain belt and the wheat belt here, southern Western Russia, even into Turkey, which has seen drought pick up in a big way here in 2025. Seeing that continue here, at least as the IRI models concern. China, North China, Manchurian Plain here. On the wetter side, India as well, monsoon season, and then into Indonesia. These three kind of going over wet here in the forecast here this summer is a pretty good La Nina signal. So coming out of that La Nina and seeing that play a role here. But dry in portions of Eastern Europe, large grain growing region here, and dry over portions of the central and western U.S. Again, highlighting this kind of background drought concern this year, albeit not as aggressive here over toward the Midwest. I'll leave it here today. Thanks for watching. I'll talk with you all again on Thursday.